Arguments over the death penalty have reemerged in Arapahoe County this week. District Attorney George Brauchler announced last Friday that he'll seek the death penalty in the case of Brandon Johnson, who was accused of killing his son and sexually assaulting his ex-girlfriend in February. The ACLU quickly responded, stating, not only is this a waste of money, but Brauchler will be adding yet another black man from the 18th Judicial District to the row. Of course, referring to death row. Eric, George Brauchler just headed up one of the biggest death penalty cases we've seen, and it did not certainly go his way in regards to getting the death penalty. Is it the right use in this scenario?
It is certainly in his toolbox, and as an elected prosecutor out there, he is entitled to seek the death penalty. I think it is misguided. I happen to believe that Colorado has probably prescribed its last death sentence. If you could not get it on James Holmes, and then in the case of that bar on South Colorado Boulevard, Farrow's Bar, I forget the name of the assailant, where they tried it in Denver and couldn't get it. I do not know in what circumstances you can get it. There's no doubt this was a heinous crime. But to my thinking, if there's an advantage to keeping the death penalty on the books these days, it's as an inducement to get a plea to life without parole, the toughest possible standard there. The defense in this case has already made clear they would plead to life without parole. If what George Brauchler wanted was leverage, he already has the leverage. He has that plea. By all accounts, George Brauchler is getting ready to run for the Republican nomination for governor and be probably a very serious candidate in that Republican contest. I would think, to expend the resources he's getting ready to expend on another death penalty prosecution, having lost that pursuit in the James Holmes case, I would think it would be difficult for him to then go 0 for 2 on death penalty cases. And my prediction is if he proceeds down this road, he will be 0 for 2.
Penn, you have a unique perspective. You've been a lawmaker tackling issues just like the death penalty and capital punishment in Colorado. You're a lawyer, so you know the different issues regarding the case. When you look at the situation, what do you think of Brauchler's decision?
Clearly, it's his prerogative, and the death penalty is a tool in the toolbox, as Eric said. The reality is it's a tool that probably makes no sense to try to deploy in Colorado anymore. During my time in the legislature, just because of how the political forces work, we were never able to successfully repeal the death penalty, even though we knew jury after jury after jury would not choose the death penalty. And there's abundant research that deals with whether there's some sort of racial bias in terms of when it's sought, when it's levied, how jurors perceive it. So George Brauchler's got all of that working against him also. But fundamentally, I agree with Eric on 2 points. Number one, even if you don't repeal it, the instance of seeking it should be very, very limited because its primary value is the same value in this case where the defendant and his counsel said, we'll plead out and accept life imprisonment without a possibility of parole and be done with it. And that probably makes sense given, number two, the James Holmes case. If you couldn't get a jury to invoke the death penalty in that district in that case, I'm not convinced, as awful as this crime was, and all of these death penalty cases are awful crimes, I'm not convinced you can get a jury to do it now. And at some point, his motives are going to start to be questioned, whether it's a political stunt, to prepare for the gubernatorial race, or whether it's something well-reasoned and well-considered.
Patty, what do you think? Was the 2018 Republican gubernatorial primary on Brauchler's mind here?
Probably, because you cannot imagine why otherwise he wouldn't just take this plea. It was a heinous crime, but the man was so clearly, it looks like clearly out of his mind. Having him locked up for the rest of his life would be a good solution for society. Save us money, save us time, save the horrors of having to go through that trial. The argument that it's racist, since Holmes was a white guy, or upper class white guy, that argument doesn't hold so well, except that it is fascinating that the guys are all on death row, all went to the same high school, and so did he. Wow,
that I did not know that. It's kind of a scary thought there. David, your thoughts on this move?
Well, the idea that if you're going to use the death penalty as leverage for a plea, that's only credible leverage when prosecutors are sometimes willing to seek it. And part of the reason I think the defendant was willing to take that life plea was because District Attorney Brauchler had credibility on the death penalty and worked very hard on the Holmes case, and I think came up to 11-1. He won every vote except the very final one, and that's the choice of the jury. But the fact is, it is on the books. The majority of Coloradans believe it is appropriate punishment for the most heinous crimes, and the ACLU's reprehensible race baiting is just out of bounds politically. George Brauchler is not a racist. He worked as hard as he could to have upper-class white James Holmes executed, and this kind of racist demagoguery on behalf by the ACLU is one of the reasons I no longer belong to that organization after having been part of it for 30 years.